Previously, he has served at the National Commission on the Rights of Child, NCRC in Islamabad. Dear Iqbal Saab, the floor is yours. You will be having 15 to 20 minutes. So over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Neil, FES, Abdullah, and co-panelists. I'm thankful to the FES for having this study. I'm very happy to see in audience many of the familiar faces who has worked on the child rights. I think Sadia Hussain is also there, and many other people are supposed to join later on. When we talk about child labor or a bonded labor or a domestic child labor, we had to see that there are a lot of laws, policies, administrative measures. So basically, this study covers 3 areas which I had tried to cover. One was to cover the Pakistan's international commitments regarding child labor, bonded labor, and hence by virtue its connection with child domestic labor. And second portion was the Pakistan's legal and policy framework, that's the domestic. And third portion, which I did, that is the formulation of the recommendations. So when we first see the first international obligation, that is the UN Convention on the Rights of Child. And UN Convention on the Rights of Child, Pakistan ratified in 90. And the very article 32 and 28, 28 talks about the education and 32 talks about the child labor. So Pakistan being the state party to the UNCRC, and we have submitted 5 periodic reports to those compliance. And time and again, this monitoring body, treaty body, which is called the Convention on the Rights of Child, which sits in Geneva, it has recommended a few things. One of them is that the adoption of the laws in the area of child labor. And also it emphasizes the having the systems and mechanisms for the enforcing the legal measures against child and bonded labor, which has maybe interface with the refugee, asylum seeking, and stateless children, which is the current topic of which is going on as well. So one of the convention is the UN Convention on the Rights of Child. Second is the ILO Convention. We say ILO Convention on child minimum age of child labor, that is the 138, and again another is the 182. But apart from that, the core human rights treaties, UNCRC, ICCPR, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, International Covenant on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights, together with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that constitutes the International Bill of Human Rights. So we have also not directly domestic child labor, but that is also connected to that thing. So in UN Convention Against Torture, Minimum Age Convention, we have also the 182 worst forms of child labor, and other non-binding like the Sustainable Development Goal legal frameworks like that. So that is the international, because in Pakistan's legal framework, the constitution comes first, then the special laws comes, and then comes the international obligations. The constitutional framework, we have the at least 4 mention of the child, 3 two in the fundamental rights, like the Article 11, subsection 3, talks about the child should not be allowed to work below the 14 years age. And second is the 25A. So that is the compulsory and free education. Third one is the protection of the family child, that is the Article 35, and then again it is the Article 37E. So in that we have again the national framework and the provincial framework. If we see the minimum age of entry into work at the federal level, yes, it is the Article 11, subsection 3 of the Constitution, Section 16 of the Mines Act 1923, which mentions the age 15 years, and then Section 50 of the Factories Act. So minimum age of entry into work is one dimension. Minimum age for light work, it is another dimension. Minimum age for hazardous work, it is another variation of the child labor. Prohibition of hazardous occupation and process for child, it is the another. And then the forced labor and prohibition, that is another. Again, connected is the prohibition of child trafficking, and then prohibition of commercial sexual exploitation of children. So I had formulated in the tabular forms all these variations, including the prohibition of use of force or compulsory recruitment of children for use in armed conflict, prohibition of use of children in illicit activities. So if we see the federal legal framework, I had devised the recommendations, one for the legislative bodies. I think that the Manaz Akbar might be coming. One dichotomy is that the constitutional provision, Article 11, subsection 3 says that any child below the 14 year shall not be allowed to enter into work, mines, or a hazardous labor. So one threshold for a child is below the 14. And second, 25A says that a child from 5 to 16 years shall complete the compulsory education. Mr. Gair, this is the dichotomy here as well, that the mostly ILO constituents, whether it is an employer or it is a trade union or it's the ILO itself, they stick to their legal framework, minimum age of convention 138. So here, this thing has to be interpreted in the Supreme Court. Either 11.3, which is with respect to a child labor, or 25A, which is respect to the education. The subsidiarity rules of the legal jurisprudence is that if any later amendment comes, it will prevail on the previous amendment. So one issue is that if we have the 16 years for the minimum for the compulsory education, then setting the age of a child to work below the 14, that come in conflict with the legal framework. That's hence the Constitution, and that is for the legal reforms and for the debate, for the civil society, for the other international organizations, that if we have set this threshold of a 16 years, a child can, if not complete the matriculation or the O level, how we are going to allow them to enter into the child labor? And child labor has its facets of a light work, of a domestic child labor, or any other work which impinge on the health, education, morals, or the development of a child. So one issue is for the policy makers, that how they reconcile the Article 11.3 and the Article 25A. Currently, there was an effort in the Assembly to amend the Pakistan Penal Code, that is the 374, that is the prohibition of forced labor or a compulsory labor. There was a suggestion that a domestic child labor is a criminal offense, because it is a child protection issue, it is a child welfare issue, it is a child labor issue. So one way is that to amend the criminal Pakistan Penal Code. And then the ambiguity of the light work. Light work is mostly misused. Some legal framework in the Punjab and the KP, they define the light work. Thank you, ma'am. So KP में जो चाइल्ड प्रोहिबिशन लॉज हैं उधर लाइट वर्क को 12 साल की उम्र में, बलोचिस्तान में 12 से 14 साल की उम्र में लाइट वर्क को डिफाइन किया जाता है. सो दिस इज द कंटेंशन कि इफ हम चाइल्ड प्रोहिबिशन लॉज में चाइल्ड लेबर और चाइल्ड वर्क को भी करते हैं तो दैट इज सब्जेक्ट, अगर क्लियर रेगुलेशंस नहीं है तो वो उसकी मिसयूज हो सकता है. So in Islamabad, I think Madam Mehnaz is here. Islamabad has a Domestic Workers Act 20 और उसके जो 22 और उसके जो rules of implementation, I think FES के साथ ही हमने we made the rules of the implementation along with the FES. So one suggestion is for the legislative bodies that how they see their domestic child labor. In Islamabad, they amended the schedule of the Employment of Children Act and they added the domestic child labor in the schedule. But that is the weaker area because it is not defined in the definitions. It is not covered into the substantive provisions. Only putting it into the schedule, how the Labor Department, which has a jurisdiction on the formal sector, they have the jurisdiction and cognizance to take cognizance into the domestic labor at the houses. So in 22 and 20, which amendment was done in the schedule of the domestic child labor, it is not being supported by the substantive provisions of the Employment of Children Act. So one route is that either Islamabad Capital Territory has to re-amend the whole Employment of a Children Act on the pattern of the Balochistan prohibition of forced and compulsory labor, where they had put into the schedule and the definition and the prohibition clauses as well. So one suggestion for the legislator is that for the Islamabad territory, they had to bring a new law for the prohibition of the domestic child labor, not by putting only into the schedule of the Employment of Children Act, but you have to cover into the substantive provisions as well. Second option ये है अभी और जो अभी मैं देख रहा हूँ, that is the 374 AMA and that they had given the power of registration. In Islamabad, there is the ICT Child Protection Authority. In section 5 of the ICT, the child protection officer is empowered to take the cognizance. तो दूसरा route है child protection का through the ICT Child Protection Authority के through. और तीसरा ये है criminal law वाला. गवर्नमेंट के जो डिपार्टमेंट्स हैं, लेबर डिपार्टमेंट हैं, उनमें से एक बड़ा इशू ये है कि we do not have a data collection proper and we do not have a use of statistical tools. Time and again, concluding observation of the UNCRC and other treaty bodies like even of the ILO conventions, they emphasize upon the government departments that we should have a data management system. In Pakistan, Pakistan Bureau of Statistics and Provincial Bureau of Statistics, they had not brought up the child labor surveys up till now. Even in few cases where data sets are ready, they are not going to be publishing it. At the protection level in the Ministry of Human Rights, they have the helpline. Child Protection Authority had in the provinces all these things, but like we saw many Rizwana case, we saw Fatma Furiro case in Sindh, Unfortunately, the jurisdiction of the Child Protection Authority, where the offenses are not defined into the special laws, because the Child Protection Authorities are not taking cognizance of the criminal offenses, it is the police. Once police is not empowered through the amendment of the 374, then they cannot take the cognizance. So this is the handicap for the Labor Department, Social Welfare Department, and for that matter, other any regulating authorities. We have also issues with the judiciary. I had given recommendations for the judiciary as well, that the first thing is that there needs to be some public interest litigation in the Supreme Court, and they had to reinterpret the definition of a child in harmonization with the international laws. Either they are going to uphold the 14 years for the child labor, or they are going to uphold the 16 years, which is going to override. So labor judiciary, there was a mapping study by the FES for the labor judiciary in Sindh and Pakistan. It's very unfortunate that all the Industrial Relations Acts, which has the mechanisms of the labor judiciary, they mostly cover the formal cognizance of the things, and these informal and domestic child labor issues are outside their view. And even labor judiciary considers these issues as a very peripheral, and mainstream judiciary is not taking the child labor issues. Or we had seen in Islamabad, Justice Babar Sattar in his judgment touched in one of the cases on the issue of the child labor. We have the recommendations then for the national and provincial human rights institutions. I'm very happy to see here the representative and the members of the National Commission on the Rights of Child. The members are here. I used to be the former member of the National Commission on the Rights of Child, and I embarked on this study when I was the member from the Sindh. National Commission on the Rights of Child has a power even to recommend the government to ratify the international treaties like the ILO Convention 189. And if during my tenure, NCRC has recommended to the Ministry of Human Resource Department and to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Human Rights that Pakistan should ratify the Convention 189 in order to bring these labor-related laws. And apart from that, either it is a National Commission on Human Rights or National Commission on Child Rights, or it is the provincial commissions, they have power to review the safeguards given in the law or the constitution for the promotion and protection of the human rights. That's again, a weaker area on the part of the oversight and monitoring bodies, on the part of the NHRIs, which we may call them the National Human Rights Institutions or the Subnational Human Rights Institutions, that they fail to identify the lacunas and the gaps in the laws. If you see, after 18th Amendment, these labor laws has been devolved to the provinces. If you can take the example in Islamabad of the Bonded Labor System Abolition Act 92, and there is a mechanism of the District Vigilance Committee. So Punjab also enacted the Bonded Labor System Abolition Act. Sindh has, KP has, Balochistan has. So these national human rights institution has to review what are the safeguards given in what is the child protection committees, what are the DVCs, what is their child protection officers. So this is the area, and then we had to follow even ILO, UN country office here, and the other international donor. We had to work in tandem for the implementation of the recommendations of the UN bodies. Either it is the Universal Periodic Reviews recommendations, or it is of the treaty bodies recommendations, or it is the concluding observations, or yesterday you had seen the GSP Plus review report on Pakistan. And it has again identified the gaps where we need to not only to legislate the laws, but we need to implement. And in the last, this study goes for the role of the civil society organizations. Of course, these NHRIs are the bridge between the government and the civil society. So we had to work with the government institutions as well. And so I will be ending on this note that in Pakistan, after 18th Amendment, provinces were empowered to legislate on the issues of child labor, bonded labor, domestic workers, and there is a good legislation and we are moving ahead. And the parliamentary committees of the oversight, which the Mehnaz Akbar Sahiba was looking after, or other National Assembly standing human rights committees. In future, it is not the only job of the legislator to make the laws, but the job of the standing committees to have the accountability of that respective departments to see whether those laws are implemented or not. So I think the rules of procedure, either in the National Assembly or the Senate or the provincial assemblies, should be amended in the next things so that these laws are implemented with the conjunction. It is a whole of a society approach. It's a whole of a government approach. And I think these recent cases of Fatma Ferrero, Rizwana, and many other such cases are eye-openers for us, that now the legitimacy or the social justification of a poverty or a lack of a development or lack of implementation because of many other causes cannot be justified. So here I will end my note, and I will be very happy to take the questions later on. Thank you, Abdullah.
Thank you so much, Iqbal Saab, for this comprehensive presentation of on the key findings of this study. Before I invite our distinguished guests for their reflections, I just want to make an announcement that each speaker would be having only 5 minutes, because then we want to take more comments from the audience. I would like to invite Mr. Iftikhar Ahmed. Iftikhar Ahmed is a comparative labor law expert and the founder of the Center for Labor Research, Pakistan. He heads the labor law department at the Wage Indicator Foundation, where he has helped raise awareness about labor rights in more than 100 countries. So Iftikhar, please share your reflections on the study in the context of domestic child labor and the wages. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. By the way, it's unfair to ask for comments just after the speaker, but okay, I'll go ahead. Thank you very much, FES and the writer for asking me to be here. It's actually really great that those at the helm of affairs, they have clarity of issues, because what happens in countries like Pakistan is there is so much ambiguity, and this ambiguity, we have more than 25 laws on child labor. If the indicator would be the number of legislations, we would be free of child labor now. But the problem is, and this is what I would like to highlight, is lack of coherence, inconsistencies in our legislation. There has been a legislation after legislation at the provincial level, at the federal government level, but there are inconsistencies which have remained. For example, first, I would like to go ahead with the first comment that I also made about the compulsory education. In 2010, yes, the Constitution said everyone should have access to education till 16 years. But the labor legislation, it allowed a child from 14 years one day to be engaged in work. So it means actually you are incentivizing a person to leave their education and go to work. Obviously, in a country like Pakistan, our aim should never be, this is what I would say, although many people would disagree, our aim should never be to eliminate child labor. We cannot. We need to regulate it. We need to regulate. This is what we need to do. We are generally told that mining and certain sectors which are very hazardous. But let me tell you, child domestic labor is the most hazardous work, because the data that is quoted in this report of 140 cases of child domestic laborers from 2010 to 2019, 96 were either tortured, raped, or killed. This is the most fatal work. No, construction or the mining is not the most fatal work. This is the most fatal work that we should be talking about. But the problem is that, as I said, our legislation, even when the legislations exist, they are inconsistent. And I'll give you examples. For example, Punjab enacted its Child Domestic Workers Act in 2019. There's no provision for social security. The employers at the end, those who were sitting in the provincial assembly, there's no provision for social security of those people who will be engaged in work. Yes, the legislation says there will be a person from 15 years of age can be engaged in part-time light work, but there is no schedule of light work. How would you define light work? Are you leaving it to the whims of the employer to define what is light work? To them, everything is light work. To them, working 13 hours per day is light work because you are giving them housing, you are giving them good food. So the legislation should have been very clear. But then once again, our general legislation says a child from 15 to 18 should work only 36 hours per week. The Child Domestic Workers Act says a child can work from 15 to 18, 48 hours per week, and they can also be engaged in overtime. But who is counting the working hours in a day, in a house? In a household, no one is counting the working hours. The person gets up at 6 a.m., they work till 12 or 11. There's a misconception that child domestic labor is a hidden phenomenon. No, it is not. We have all seen our relatives, sometimes our own selves, engaging child laborers, child domestic labor. It is not a hidden phenomena. The hidden phenomena is something that we don't know about. No, we know that child domestic labor exists, and we all have people, our relatives, our friends, who have been engaging. Similar is the issue in the Islamabad Capital Territory Domestic Workers Act. For example, the legislation says 16 years of age, the person can be engaged as a domestic worker. But then there's no talk about live-in domestic work. The tortures, the rapes, the killings happen only when the person is live-in. A person, if he or she is coming for 2 hours or 3 hours per day, they will not be killed there. They will be killed only once they are living in. And we all know the 2 cases of the High Court's judges whose wives killed their domestic laborers. How did it happen? It happened because they were living. But unfortunately, the Islamabad Capital Territory Domestic Workers Act, it does not address that issue of live-in domestic workers. There's this concept that, okay, if there are 37 million households in this country, every 4th household generally has a domestic worker. So 9 million domestic workers. Of these, let's assume every 4th household has a child domestic worker, 2.5 or 2.2 million domestic workers. Okay, wonderful. But the problem is generally our labor legislation imposes the responsibility of checking the workplaces on labor inspectors. Our labor inspectors have not been able to check the workplaces, which are only 500,000, the shops and establishments and factories, which are only 500,000. How are you expecting them to check 9 million workplaces? It's impossible for them. So what should we do? The first thing that I would suggest is to fix the inconsistencies in legislation. Unless you have clear laws, you cannot expect neither the employer nor the government to enforce them. No, it's impossible. The second thing is whether it should be the Labor Department. No, they don't have the capacity. They simply can't do it because they have not been able to check 500,000 workplaces in the whole country. There are only less than 600 labor inspectors in the country. I would not suggest to increase the labor inspectors to 6,000. No. This should be the job of the local governments. Your local governments know very well. They know each street who lives in there, who is hiring a child domestic worker or not. But then my suggestion would be to always start with Islamabad Capital Territory. Why? It's a city of 2.3 million. Why do we always start with Punjab? Why do we always start with Sindh? I mean, it's impossible to implement a law there in 2-3 years. No, it should always be Islamabad Capital Territory should set the minimum standards. By the way, I'm of the view that even after the 18th Amendment, the federation, the federal government still has the mandate to set the minimum standards, because this is what the Supreme Court thinks. This is what their responsibility is under the conventions, the UN conventions that the state of Pakistan has ratified. So if you ask me, my first suggestion would be to go for the gated communities. Why not ask the DHAs and the barriers to ensure that there's no child domestic labor there? Let's give an example to the remaining country rather than going to Punjab and say, yes, you have a total population of 110 million, enforce this law. It's impossible. It will never happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Iftikhar, for raising these important points, particularly about the inconsistencies in the legislation, which will take me to connect this question with our next speaker. Now, I would like to invite Barrister Rida Tahir. Barrister Rida is an expert on gender and child rights and a renowned Pakistani scholar currently serving as the legal advisor for the Sindh Human Rights Commission. She has made numerous contributions in the legal field with her publications for the University of Oxford, University of Cambridge, London School of Economics and Political Science, Durham Asian Labor Law Journal, and others. Rida, as Iftikhar mentioned about the inconsistency in the labor legislation, particularly about the child domestic labor in general, and I'm like, they are also considered as the big hurdles to end this menace. Please give your reflections on the study in this context, and how would you connect this thing that whether the legislation, we have plenty of legislation, but it is not helping. And secondly, the role of government, local government, as Iftikhar mentioned, that there could be a effective role of local government, but you are open to your own talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abdullah, for inviting me to speak, and FES as well for launching this study when we celebrate the Universal Children's Day this week. And this is one of the most important topics because every 1 in 4 households in Pakistan have a child who is working in domestic labor. So that is a very significant population of children, considering the fact that 45% of the children, of the people in Pakistan, the population is under the age of 18. And when you asked me regarding the inconsistencies, it was in fact Pakistan ratified the UNCRC 33 years ago, and it just recently submitted its 6th and 7th combined reports, but also received feedback and concluding observations on its 5th report, when they once again reiterated the same thing again that they had previously provided in their previous concluding observations as well, that there needs to be a uniform age of the child, which is under the age of 18 as per Article 1 of the UNCRC. I do believe that one of the significant loopholes that contributes towards this menace is the fact that there are so many inconsistencies in the age limits. So for example, if you talk about the province of Sindh only, Sindh does not have a specific law like Punjab and Islamabad. I will not go into the details of these laws. They've already been spoken about, but they have their own varying age limits. Sindh does not have a specific law. It does have a law on home-based work, which is a completely different phenomenon, and often stakeholders confuse the two. So home-based work would be a child making bangles perhaps at his own residence, and the age limit for that is under the age of 14. But when we talk about the Sindh Child Protection Authority Act, which is a procedural law, like you asked me regarding the role of the local government as well. So that is an excellent law. It was recently amended in 2022, and it stated that a child would be somebody who would be under the age of 18. So it provides a special procedure, special protection mechanisms. And recently in 2022, the definition of special protection mechanisms was also redefined, and they included child domestic work within that. But the issue over here now is that they do not have the jurisdiction to enter inside's home and then arrest the people or make it a cognizable offense for the criminal justice system to kick in. And so for that, in order to tackle that issue, Abdullah, I do believe that more than the local government, I think we need to make it a cognizable offense in the Pakistan Penal Code only. So for example, like Sir Iqbal also said that Section 374 can be amended, but what I do believe is that it needs to be made a cognizable offense. The state can be a complainant perhaps, so that if the parents don't complain, if the neighborhood doesn't complain, then anybody who's going and visiting and seeing, for example, the Sindh Child Protection Authority also has a helpline. It's the same number 1121 across the country, but each province has their own workforce and their own special law governing that, but the helpline number remains the same. So anybody can complain and it can be a cognizable offense. But more importantly, it also needs to be a non-compounding non-compoundable offense when the Pakistan Penal Code is amended. Because as you'd recently seen the case of Rizwana and the case of Zahra before that as well, there were judges who were abusing the girls. They were sexually abusing them. They were torturing them. They had marks on their bodies. But then it was not a non-compoundable offense, which means that you can enter into a compromise with the parents who do send their children to work because of the issue of poverty only. So more than the local government, I think that it needs to, the Pakistan Penal Code needs to be amended, and that will channel the law across all the provinces. So you do not actually need like special legislation and work so much extensively towards special legislation than in each province. But then again, I also wanted to open the room towards civil liabilities as well. There was something I wanted to highlight to the author as well, that recently the Protection Against Harassment of Women at the Workplace Act was amended in 2022, and the definitions of that were changed. It has a key role over here because child domestic workers were specifically included in Section 2F. So they made an amendment and included domestic workers, and then they also amended Section 2C and they included a person. Prior to this, it was just a man or a woman, and person is a very comprehensive definition to define individuals because it can include anybody, man, woman, children, transgender persons even. And the thing that I wanted to mention over here is that in 2H, it defines harassment as well as abusive environment. So a child domestic worker that is facing these two phenomena, he can also have access to civil liabilities, and that is an easier test to prove because that is on a balance of probabilities as opposed to prove beyond reasonable doubt in the criminal system. So that can be more helpful for those people who want to access civil liabilities as opposed to criminal liabilities. But then since Ms. Mehnaz is over here as well, I also wanted to say that the legislator has a key role to play here because it has loopholes of its own. It has an inquiry committee before you can go to the ombudsman. So how does that work when we're working at a home of a person? How does the mechanism of an inquiry committee work then? Because then they have to be 3 persons who have to sit within that same household and decide whether that abuse has happened or not. So there is significant gaps and loopholes there as well. Perhaps you can just directly go and invoke the jurisdiction of the ombudsman as well. So there is a significant loophole that can also be covered to ensure that a child domestic worker has access to not only criminal liabilities, but civil liabilities as well. I think that concludes my 5 minutes. Thank you so much, Abdullah, once again for giving me a chance to speak.
Thank you so much, Rida. Now I would like to invite our next speaker, Khalda Salimi Saiba, who is the Executive Director of SUCH, which is an Islamabad-based NGO in a special consultative status with the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations. Khalida Saiba is the person from whom I learned about the child rights, because when I started working with the SUCH, it was the first experience to know like the abuses our children face in this country, including the sexual abuses. So Khalda Saiba, can you share your reflections on the key findings of this study in the context of the implementation of UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, or any thought you would like to share with us on this study? Thank you.
Thank you, Abdullah, and I'm grateful to FES for having me here and inviting me to share my certain thoughts. And also I acknowledge the presence of ILO, the most relevant department and the UN body. And among audience, I must say some of my teachers who are pioneers of raising awareness and acknowledging the children's rights in Pakistan are among the audience, and I'm nobody to sit here and give my view, but since we have started working with SUCH, and we experienced that when if we set up some incubators and let the government relevant authorities know what is happening in Pakistan, So my organization, together with the relevant professionals, we set up child protection centers in the most vulnerable areas of Rawalpindi and Islamabad. Later, we expanded our work in Peshawar also, and we set up child protection units where first time we have started registering the children who are exposed to sexual abuse. Then we have been working since 1989. And I still remember first time I took the government officials to those areas where the child sexual abuse and commercial sexual exploitation was very much prevalent. And many of the relevant government functionaries, they were not even aware of this. So the first mission was to make these issues accepted and recognized, and then see the political commitment. And I can see a lot of positive, initiatives, and I really appreciate the Mr. Iqbal Ahmed Ditto's hard work, and it's commendable work. And it's really very, very important to keep on knocking our heads and the heads of relevant authorities to, to realize, to acknowledge, and to do actions. So when we started working, the police department, we used to go to the police stations and see, because there is a fashion in ICT that whenever the new administration comes, they just start arresting the beggar children, or to clean the Islamabad from begging and this and that. And then I went to the police station and I saw all the arrested children under which act they were, because they were beggars, but they put under Vagrancy Act, and the relevant station house officer told, oh, all the bad children are now in the prison. And so I asked, can I see the under which charge you arrested the children? And they said it's Vagrancy Act. And I was so unhappy with this Vagrancy Act and its implementation. Then I took one of the learned personalities sitting in this hall. I took them to the prison, and we saw the children over there. And then the police was showing their performance by arresting the children and sending them to the prison. It's a very paradoxical, situation. And then the children shared their experiences of sexual exploitation. And similarly, when UNICEF has organized one seminar to work on the legislation, National Plan of Action. Fortunately or unfortunately, I have been part of all the processes of emerging and working on the legislation and National Plan of Action for Children and post ratification and all that. So it took me very, very hard time to convince the lawyer. I don't want to say his name. I don't know whether he's alive or not, to put domestic child work under hazardous work. And at that time, UNICEF has already declared it, but the mindset of our legislators were so that they say, no, it's a very safe and good opportunity for children to work as domestic work. And at that time, I had been to Bangladesh and Sri Lanka and and I saw the model projects which have been already working on the domestic child work as a hazardous work, because all those children have PTSD syndrome, post-traumatic stress disorders, by locking up in the homes. So it's a journey, and I'm very happy to see this research, and it's very timely, and we must continue. Instead of we know the issue of capacities, we know the issue of mindset and the fixation, and how we perceive. We know the perception locks which which really lead to such practices. So I think I appreciate FES for, I think 20 years back, I was working as volunteer with FES. Now, I must have been dead by now when I see the violations, but I'm a very optimistic person, and the presence of Iqbal, Dittu, and Abdullah, a star of our journey, I must, and Mehnaz, we very much look forward. We also kind of work together on certain issues. And so those were the days when from private to public, the visibility of the issues, and then legislation and the effective implementation. And I think I'm a very optimistic person. Things are going towards a positive direction, and we will see a society free of violence and torture. And but I just, at the end, I want to quote a story, which the story is originated in India, all collective India, Barasarid Pakohin, that 6 blind men defining the elephant. So the whosoever, whatever part was in the hand of that blind man, he was narrating the reality and the you see of the elephant, and he was very much believing that the elephant is a pillar, is a soft thing. So they were all working on their partial truth, partial reality. But when we reach to the conclusion that, oh, it's an elephant, it's only from collective wisdom. The collective wisdom can lead us to see the reality of that elephant. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. And I think we believe and we have a hope that we can, our nation can see the elephant of child abuse one day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abba Khalda. I would like to invite Mr. Gia Tonstal, the country director of ILO Office for Pakistan. Mr. Tonstal has served as a resource mobilization specialist and operations specialist in the ILO's regional office for Africa. He started his ILO career in the Bureau of Gender Equality, where he managed a portfolio of development cooperation projects as the chief technical advisor. Mr. Gia, please share your reflections on the study and also shed some light on ILO Pakistan's intervention on child domestic labor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abdullah. Dr. Niels, fellow panelists, distinguished participants. Let me first of all thank the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung for inviting me today and for associating the International Labour Organization with this event. It's an honor to be here, and it's a pleasure to engage as always. I commend the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung for the report that has been commissioned, and I of course congratulate the author, who is sitting to my right, on a very readable report. Colleagues, ILO ever since 1919 has worked to promote social justice, and we usually say that nothing can be more socially unjust than child labor. We all agree that every child has the right to a childhood and should be protected from child labor in all its forms. And the only place where a child should work, and work very, very hard to the best of their abilities, is in school. For nearly 2 decades, since 2000, we saw that the world was making good progress on reducing child labor. However, over the past few years, we've seen, mostly due to crises such as COVID-19, we also saw it following the floods in Pakistan last year, that families have been plunged into poverty and forced more children into a world of work where they clearly do not belong. And sadly, global estimates now say that 160 million children are still engaged in child labor, which means almost 1 in 10 children still is engaged in child labor. ILO is very conscious that the Pakistan Labor Force Survey from 2021 estimates that 8% of 10 to 14-year-old children in Pakistan are involved in some form of work. and more recent provincial child labor surveys in Punjab and Gilgit-Baltistan report up to 13% of 5 to 14-year-olds are engaged in child labor. Children who are denied the fundamental right to access education, making child labor a human rights as well as a developmental challenge. ILO believes that decent work is the answer, and it is an essential component of a prosperous society. Just a few months ago, in May this year, the government of Pakistan, along with employers and trade unions, the real players of the economy, as we say, launched a decent work country program for Pakistan, a program that aims to achieve a just transition to a more inclusive and socially just world of work in Pakistan. And this is why the Decent Work Country program includes measures to support the national strategic framework to eliminate child labor and bonded labor. And we are very pleased to note that in line with the recommendations of this framework, provincial departments of labor are taking steps to develop and strengthen legislation, rules, and regulations to enforce laws and implement policies and action plans to combat child labor. Provinces of Punjab and Sindh have constituted district vigilance committees, which work in all of the districts of both provinces to address child and forced labor. I believe Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan are also forming such committees. Colleagues, Pakistan has ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, as well as ILO conventions on the minimum age for admission to employment and the Convention on the worst forms of child labor. This is commendable. It requires the government to take all appropriate legislative, administrative, social, and educational measures to protect children from all forms of physical and mental violence, injuries, abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Yet, a recent study conducted by ILO revealed that 1 in 4 households, as we heard, do employ a child in domestic work. These are predominantly girls, and these are predominantly aged 10 to 14. There are signs of hope, however. We are encouraged that the contributions of partners led to the approval of the Islamabad Capital Territory Domestic Workers Act of 22. And we also see positive developments in the efforts by the government to align the rules of business of the Domestic Workers Act with the principles of ILO's Convention 189 on decent work for domestic workers. And we are, of course, encouraged by the fact that the government has placed on its ratification calendar Convention 189 of the ILO. Another encouraging development is the formulation of rules of business for the Punjab Domestic Workers Act. These rules are currently being reviewed with the support of ILO, and the expectation is to see their approval very soon. I'd also like to mention the establishment of the Domestic Workers Employers Association in Punjab, which aims to promote social dialogue between the stakeholders in the world of work for dispute resolution between domestic workers and employers. Let me just conclude by saying ILO has worked with a number of various institutions across Pakistan, including Child Labor, Child Protection Institute, law enforcement agencies, community-based communities to raise awareness about child labor, particularly in domestic work, encouraging vigilance and detecting instances of exploitation, reporting to relevant authorities. And I must say that these initiatives have shown very promising results in fostering a deeper understanding and sensitivity to child rights and the issue of child labor, facilitating improved coordination amongst law enforcement organizations, civil society, and the media, and so forth. So I just wanted to end on a positive note, and in conclusion, once again, thank the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung for inviting us, and also pledge ILO's continued support and collaboration to all stakeholders to prevent and end child labor in all its forms in Pakistan. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gear. Now I would invite Ms. Mehnaz Akbar Aziz. Mehnaz Sahiba's presence is not only an honor, but a kind of encouragement for all those who have been working on the child issues. Mehnaz Sahiba is the former member of the National Assembly of Pakistan and a development professional. As an elected parliamentarian, she was leading the cause of children's rights in the parliament and has been focused on legislating for the protection of child rights. She has been the convener of Parliamentary Caucus on Child Rights and the member of National Assembly's standing committees on foreign affairs, federal education, professional training, and CPEC. Ms. Aziz also chaired a special committee on Child Rights Convention at the SDGs Parliamentary Task Force, and she also served as the Parliamentary Secretary for Law. Mehnaz Sahiba, can you please share your reflections on the study and also tell us the role of political parties in the parliament when it comes to the child domestic labor in Pakistan? Thank you so much.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. I'm really happy to see youngsters, mostly youngsters in the audience, because ये जिम्मेदारी तो अब आपकी है. इस काम को आगे आपने लेके जाना है. There are very few people that I've come across, professionals, dedicated activists who are committed to child rights. Fortunately, this panel has all those stars that you would see all over Pakistan working, give or take a few more. So Iqbal Ditho, thank you so much. As a Pakistani, I would like to thank you for continuing to work on child rights. Though in the parliament and otherwise, it's not a very sexy subject. Abdullah Dayo, thank you so much for always responding to the real needs. हमेशा अब्दुल्ला ने जब इनसे मैंने बात की as a parliamentarian कि this is what we need to do, and he's always responded and he's always made a way of doing that. Usually what happens is कि ये जो donor organizations होती हैं, the donor organizations bring in their own agendas and we become post offices. So I had the opportunity that I was working for 25 odd years before I landed up in the parliament as an elected member. Gayer, Neil, and others on the panel, thank you so much. So I would just sort of throw a question at the audience at the onset, which has bothered me, and I haven't bothered me and made me think a lot, that what is the value of a child, a Pakistani child, for us Pakistanis? I haven't been able to. This is an economist who asked me this question, that how do we value our children? So when I came to the parliament, I didn't hear about children. I'd been working on children's education, my organization, Children's Global Network, for 25 years, marginalized kids and all. So, बच्चों की बात नहीं होती थी. Parliament only recognizes a citizen as a citizen when it turns 18 and of voter age. So what happens before that, उसकी कोई ज़्यादा बातचीत नहीं होती. कभी, we will talk about immunization, of course, education, but our heart is really not in it. So first I will talk to you, to us all as a society. What is our responsibility? It is because society constitutes the parliament, and it is the collective pressure and the collective measures that can take, change the course. We do Twitter pressure groups and all that. It works. It really works, right? So parliament, when I came, then we, started to talk about children, and then SDGs mein kiya. I started, then, collectively, because there is nothing individual in the parliament. So a lot of people, and bipartisan, all the parties followed, and especially women. Women are really hardworking and conscientious, especially the parliamentarians. So udhar baatcheet shuru hui. So let's come. I'm just going to then come to the study, and yeah, it's good to have studies as reference points. But what's happening? I mean, and it takes a lot to undertake a study when there is no real data and surveys available, as mentioned by Iqbal Saab, as mentioned by Iftikhar Saab. और तो ये है कि और उसमें एक स्टडी को कंपाइल करना, but we have to, I will, you know, because I don't like to just talk about problems, I'll also like to recommend solutions. तो इस स्टडी का हमने करना क्या? What are we going to do with the study? I would suggest take it to the universities. Really take it to the universities. Share it with children, youth. मेरे लिए तो अब सब बच्चे हैं, you know. So share it with the youth and formulate, sit down with HEC and come up with a strategy how these, you know, to have, some community service around it or whatever, because I and Gayer were at an event at, the Girl Guides event, and they had made a like a responsible group, a community service group, कि आपने जाके बच्चों को जो जो ये कर रहे हैं, चाइल्ड लेबर कर रहे हैं, उनको किस तरीके से मेन स्ट्रीम एजुकेशन में डालना है. So that is very important to do with the study. So I would say that make it a living study and take it to the youth of Pakistan and make them own. एक टिकर चल गया जियो में, मैंने ट्वीट कर दिया, बड़ा अच्छा जी सेशन था, उससे इतना फर्क नहीं पड़ेगा. But we need to, integrate it into the fabric of our society. What I find missing, and when I was at the parliament, is that these issues, human rights issues, child rights issues, minorities issues, are not integrated into our fabric as human beings, as parliamentarians, as politicians. They are not big issues. Are these the are children the 5 big issues of Pakistan? Would IMF consider talking about children of Pakistan? No, we have to put it on the agenda, and we can all collectively do it, not just us sitting at the table here. Also, talking just about child domestic workers, it's not black and white. I've heard since Rizwana का केस हुआ, फातिमा फरारो का केस हुआ, फिर एक थर्ड केस भी था, वो हुए, उसमें बात होना शुरू हो गई कि criminalized domestic child workers, ये कर दें, वो कर दें. Look at the state of Pakistan. Look at the inflation. Look at the poverty. And this is not by happen chance. ये ऐसे ही नहीं हो गया कि बच्चों ने उठ के काम करना शुरू. This is the strategy of the parents who are stateless people. They're not covered by the state because of our huge population. ये उनकी strategy है of survival. It is their strategy of survival. So should we just say that, yeah, let's take this child away from domestic work and put them in the school? क्या value है उसकी school में? क्या वो खाएंगे कैसे? So this is a strategy that is happening in interior Sindh, in South Punjab, other areas. It's rampant. ठीक है? So उसमें what are the alternatives? BISP can be an alternative. There can be other alternatives as well to recognize and see what can happen. So I passed this law on domestic protection of domestic workers. The resistance that I got was from the bureaucrats of Islamabad, not the top bureaucrats, but the bureaucrats sitting in the committees and all. And they said, we do service to the children, we educate them and all that. I said, educate them while they're sitting in their homes. So ye कि हम सारे मुजरिम हैं. And when it says that 1 in 4 households, तो आप में से एक, you're also employing child labor. अब मैं आपसे ये नहीं कहूंगी कि हाथ खड़ा कर लें. I don't want to, put you on the spot. हम सब कर रहे हैं ना. So उसमें ये है कि how can we, तो जो protection of domestic workers bill has this point on children's age, which is 14, that under 14 cannot be employed. And I'm really thankful to FES for, enabling, क्या कहते हैं, discussion of stakeholders when we were about to make the rules. I was the Parliamentary Secretary for Law and Justice, and we did that. And I was told that it's the first time in the history that rules are made by some kind of consultation. Abdullah, आप मुझे चुप कराएंगे, मैं इतनी जल्दी चुप नहीं करूंगी क्योंकि 2-3 मेरे और points हैं. And Gayer, I think you were not here, but ILO, the final rules I sent to ILO, because the job of these organizations are to assist us technically. We have to, point out what are the issues of Pakistan. And these two organizations were stellar. And UNICEF also, they put in something for, मैंने बाद में UNICEF से भी कर दिया, but these two organizations were really spot on. So we need to train our parliamentarians on how to do this. अच्छा, अब क्या हुआ? Where is the protection of domestic workers? So the rules were formulated and they were sent to the commissioner's office. Formulate हमने कर लिए, लॉ एंड जस्टिस ने कर लिए, हालांकि हमारा मैंडेट नहीं था, इंटीरियर मिनिस्ट्री का मैंडेट था, हमने कर दिए. फिर the parliament completed its cycle. I went to the commissioner and he said, well, I can't do anything, we'll have to wait for the elected this elected government cycle to begin, elected parliament cycle to begin. So ये है कि there are many factors that hamper. अच्छा, उसमें हमारी bureaucracy बहुत important है, that we put this under the noses of the bureaucracy, this the report, and we question them and we talk to them about this. This is very important, and this is, we pass the act and how do we create implementation for that. That's really important. अच्छा, फिर उसमें ये है कि moving forward, I think it is all of us are responsible for undertaking this. एक तो जो social है, जो social responsibility, and then again इकबाल साहब, आप लोग सारे, खालदा, इफ्तिखार साहब, रिदा, हमारी जो responsibility है as we go into the next cycle of the parliament, our responsibility is to review the legislations that have already been formulated. On this panel we have talked about कितने हमने laws की बात कर ली, तो लेकिन यह है कि उनको हम बैठ के जरा रिव्यू कर लें और उसकी implementation रिव्यू कर लें. और where we are failing is that when we come to the budgetary cycle, we don't talk about giving budgets for the implementation. Call center को कौन फंड करेगा, मतलब पुलिस की ट्रेनिंग को कौन फंड करेगा, वो बजट में होता ही नहीं है. So we have a lot to do, we have a lot of homework to do हम सबके लिए. और लेकिन coming back to the fact that it is not about the report and the law and the implementation of the law, but it is about what we feel, how responsible we feel towards the stateless part of the society. State doesn't reach them. I walk on the main Margalla road, that's the backside of my home, and I see beggar children, walking. ये जो stateless children है ना, they are walking barefoot in this cold weather, early in the morning. जूते नहीं है. एक से मैंने पूछा तो उसने कहा आदत ही नहीं है, I'm not used to wearing shoes. Do we notice? Do we care? So we have to start where, how do we value our children and how much do we care and what are we ready to do as a society collectively. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mena Saba. Now we would open the floor for some questions, for some comments, if we have any. जी, पहले आपका हाथ है, फिर मैं आपकी तरफ आ रहा हूँ. पहले आप माइक इनकी तरफ ले आइएगा, आप अपना नाम बताइएगा और मुख्तसर रखिएगा अपने क्वेश्चन या कमेंट को, और ये भी बताइएगा किससे है सवाल या कमेंट.
मेरा सवाल जर्नल है. देखें, बहुत अच्छी डिस्कशन थी. सबसे पहले चाइल्ड लेबर के हवाले से बहुत अच्छे कमेंट्स आए, बट यू नो दैट वी नीड टू थिंक ब्रॉडर देन दिस. प्रॉब्लम ये है कि कोई पेरेंट नहीं चाहते कि अपने बच्चों को वो भेजें, वार करें, बट वन द स्टेट इज नॉट रिस्पॉन्सिबल, इट नॉट टेकिंग एनी रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी. वो सोशल कट लगा रही है, वो एजुकेशन कट लगा रही है, बाकी मामला कर रही है, तो मुझे बताएं कि कैसे वो चाइल्ड लेबर प्रोटेक्ट कर सकते हैं. और इसके अलावा देखें, आप प्री बजट था एजुकेशन का, वो आपने खत्म कर दिया. वी आर सिटिंग इस्लामाबाद, इट्स टू इजी टू सिट इन मैरियट एंड टॉक अबाउट द बेसिक थिंग्स, बट वंस गो इन द मतलब दैट रूरल एरियाज और सिंध में और बाकी इलाकों में, वहां पर आपको हालात कुछ और नजर आते हैं. स्टेट इज नॉट टेकिंग एनी रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी अबाउट द सोशल सिक्योरिटी. कोई ऐसी चीज नहीं आ रही, तो इसके ऊपर बताएं कि कोई प्रोस्पेक्ट, कोई पॉलिसी मेजर वगैरह कुछ भी.
जी, आपका सवाल था जी. जो मेरे दोस्त हैं उनसे मैं सवाल नहीं लूंगा.
Good afternoon. My name is Aisha Aziz and I am the head of sustainability for Packages Group. Child labor, I'm attending this session out of my own interest as well. We've been working, in the waste paper and agricultural supply chains for the last many years. As a paper industry, we are largely dependent on waste paper, which is a very important material that we use for making paper. And we're also dependent on wheat straw, which is an agricultural byproduct. So we're working, these two supply chain streams are very, very important for us. With ILO, we had a 3-year project on decent work deficits in these two supply chains. And since this, one of the biggest risks in both these streams is child labor. On a capacity, so while we were doing this study, it was a 3-year study, we did find out that this is beyond any one organization's scope. So what we did that, with the help of ILO, we did develop some mechanisms to ensure that our supply chain is risk-free. But in addition, we also set up some schools, which was a 10-year project in the waste picking communities. But what happened after these schools, we rehabilitated 640 children who were involved in child labor. We took them out of that and educated them, and it was a 10-year long commitment. Now some of
आपका
those
सवाल अगर आ जाए तो
Yes,
बहुत,
I'm
क्योंकि
just
सबको
going to-
मौका देना है.
Yes,
जी.
so I need to build the context. That's why I'm telling you about this. So once the 10-year project was over, some of our students are now they've graduated from technical schools as well. We find that there's a gap. We cannot continue doing that forever. How can government support this? Because
Okay.
after a 10-year pilot, we're still in the same position.
ड्यू डिलीजेंस और इसके लोग ये थैंक यू. यहाँ से हम 2 सवाल लेते हैं. एक आपका है, फिर मैं आ रहा हूँ की तरफ. इधर माइक लेकर आइएगा. फॉर मुख्तसर सवाल रखिएगा.
जी बिल्कुल. This is on. Working. Okay. My name is Shafat Zahir. I'm from Tariff Commission, Ministry of Commerce. I'm very much interested in this topic as an individual because it's very close to my heart. I see this every day. We all see it. And I wanted to ask about the economics of domestic child labor because that is the most important thing because these children are working because they are poor. So Madam Mehnaz really pointed this out well that we should initiate a holistic program like this. We should target these children. We should have a survey and we should is there any initiative by the government to support them financially? Like one of the singers, Shahzad Roy, he initiated a program Paid to Learn. So why can't we have this at the national level? Because these children are not going to stop working because they don't have the money to go to school.
थैंक यू.
Okay.
जी आपका
Thank
सवाल.
you.
जी अपना नाम और सवाल.
हेलो अस्सलाम वालेकुम. मेरा नाम उबैद है. मैं आईपीए का स्टूडेंट हूँ कराची से और मेरा सवाल एक जनरल पैनलिस्ट से है. First of all, a lot of the panelists have rightly pointed out that laws may inconsistencies है, but there is also a gap between what the general population practices and so for example, the laws तो है तब भी they still exist, but for example, you guys mentioned that 1 in 4 जो है वो exist करते हैं labor. So for example, जो top elite लोग हैं, for example, people in parliaments and people in judiciary. So does the change वहाँ से start होना चाहिए एक तो, and दूसरी चीज, why is the conversation very isolated to child labor? For example, isn't child labor also a part of a bigger debate on, for example, poverty and social protection, a lot of the other stuff? And I find that missing in a lot of these conversations. So
थैंक यू. मुर्तजा आखिरी आप सवाल करें क्विकली और फिर हम लंच का वक्फा होने जा रहा है और हम लंच पे ये आथर के साथ हम आपको बिठा रहे हैं और वहाँ पे आप इनसे खुल के सवाल कीजिएगा. जी
अस्सलाम वालेकुम. मेरा
वेरी
नाम
क्विकली.
मुर्तजा है. मैं एज ए कंसल्टेंट हूँ प्राइवेट कंपनी है उसमें. तो मेरा क्वेश्चन ये है कि if there any country in the world where there is no child labor, अगर वहाँ पर चाइल्ड लेबर नहीं है, अगर कम है तो उसकी क्या वजूहत है? तो वो चीज़ अगर यहाँ पे जो लॉज है या कानून है जो भी है, अगर पाकिस्तान में वो चीज़ लाई जाए तो आई थिंक वी कैन रिड्यूस चाइल्ड लेबर.
Now, I would also put this time bar on the author of this study to respond to these comments in 5 minutes maximum.
Thank you, Abdullah. Thank you, my other friends who has later joined. Responding last first, मुझे ये भी बताएं, tell me any country in the world which has progressed by allowing the child labor. If it was the Second World War, you take it Germany or you take it Japan or you take any country. So you cannot prosper by allowing the child labor and you say you had developed the thing. So there is no similar country. Yes, there are issues. If you give the minimum wage to the adult worker, in Sindh, when I took the charge of this in the Human Rights Commission chairperson, I was amazed to know that in the government entities, the minimum wage was not given to the sanitary workers, to the private, the government-owned schools in the Sindh Education Foundation. So if you had studied the recent study of the Nobel laureate of economics, who was given the award year before last year, his study was that by ensuring the minimum wage, it enhances the GDP. So this is the common misperception here amongst the employers, that if you are giving the minimum wage to the adults, if you are giving a full minimum wage to one adult, I am sure he will or she will be able to send their 2 children to the school. If you are only giving, why we are giving, employing a child? Because we want to exploit them, because they are vulnerable, because they do not have a voice. So I don't think there is a lack of resources. There is a lack of will. How much amount we had earmarked for the Benazir Income Support Program or the SAS program? How much it is under the Baitul Mal? How much under it is the Zakat? I did a study in Sindh province. One district of Sindh province at least receives more than 40 crore rupees under various social protection mechanisms. So if you are going to identify the families who are really in need of the social protection, hardly they will be 10,000, 5,000. So you can divert the amount properly. So issue is of the policies. So I must here quote the Amartya Sen, that when there are famines, you have not seen the generals and brigadiers dying up because of the hunger. Because if you're not going to criticize the policies, in desert of Thar, in Sindh, they had given the subsidy of the wheat of the 16 billion rupees in 6 cycles. Has it ended the malnutrition? No. The real problem was to carry the water, Thar miner there to give the water to the animals who can feed, and they are the mainstay of the population over there. So main issue is of the policies. How you define the human security, how you define the national security, how you define the Human Development Index, how you define the state's capability. It's the education, it's the health, it is the rule of law. So second question was here, just quickly. Yes, I know, Madam Mehnaz, I will be very happy, and my colleagues from National Commission on the Rights of Child here, Dr. Ata Mustafa is also here. We also tried in National Commission that we will be having a drafting manual on child rights for the parliamentarians. Okay. Yeah. So, but I don't know whether the current chairperson is carrying that umbrella or not. But I leave it open to the Safdar Saab is here, that there needs to be the drafting manual, because when I was presented before the National Standing Committee on Human Rights in the functional committee in the Senate, believe me, many of the senators and the legislators were asking the questions that we are party to these treaties just because of the international pressure. I say, excuse me, ma'am, there is no free lunch in the world. If you are going to be party of the GSP Plus, if you want a table on the Human Rights Council and you are celebrating in the whole of the world that we are the member of the Human Rights Council, if you want to out of the gray list of the FATF, so we need to educate the parliamentarians. I know they need to have a law clerics like the UK and the British Parliament and other American parliaments, but here the same is the issue with the provincial assemblies. They think it is the Western agenda. It is the just fanciful things. So the questions 1 and 2, which were asked, that poverty, Nelson Mandela has told that poverty is not inevitable. It's a man-made. Poverty can be eradicated. Poverty is the manifestation of the policies. How do you see the priorities of the state? If you had to buy the defense, how much one F-16 costs you? How much one tank costs you? If you had to carry out these things, so I'm sorry, I'm being a civil society and the wearing the cape of the National Human Rights Institutions. So it is the matter of the priority. So it's not the issue of the lack of resources. So I think we all have to work together. So supply chain, I'm not expert. Iftikhar is a wage indicator. He can give you, and you are Neil can reflect on the supply chain. But the business and human rights is a new arena, which the government of Pakistan has a national action plan on business and human rights, which many organizations are working. And these are the abuses by the corporate entities, by the private sectors, because up till now we had been only focusing on the civil and political rights. Now we had to focus on the economic, social, cultural rights. Mr. Gair, this is the issue which I always ask the employers, the corporate entities, that the abuses which are being done by the non-state actors, they are equally important. It is not only the state agents or the government organs, but the corporate entities who violates the human rights as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Iqbal Saab. Before I hand over the mic to Dr. Niels, I just want to end my intervention with a couplet of Nida Fazli, who says, "Ghar se masjid hai bahut dur, chalo yun kar le, kisi rote hue bacche ko hasaya jaye." Over to you, Dr. Niels.
Thank you so much, Abdullah. As always, time is too short. I would have loved to hear what the other panelists would have said to the reactions from the audience, but I think after we conclude, there is also some time. I just have a few observations. So one question is, child domestic labor is part of a larger issue like poverty and development, decent work. These kinds of things need to be addressed if we want to tackle child domestic labor. Elites should play a role model function here. So if elites are calling on the broader society to abolish child labor, they should not indulge in child labor on their own. So I think it has to start from there. International treaties like ILO conventions matter greatly in order to foster change and to apply some pressure on political decision makers, but also the economy and the civil society. And that we as FES are very happy to provide platforms to raise those issues on the terms that matter for the countries that we are working in. We are not in a position to push through big changes, but we can provide a platform for kicking off discussions that have to be picked up by civil society, by political decision makers, by the society at large in the countries we work in. So if this worked here in the case of child domestic labor, we have been, by our standards, successful, but of course the real work begins now and has to be done not by us, but by those on the panel, by you in the audience, and by those who are involved. Lastly, I want to, it has been said there are no free lunches. I think, in fact, today there is. And we also have free books. So poolside, there's our bookstall where you can get this study and other studies as well. For instance, the study on human security in Pakistan, which ties in very neatly to all these issues we have discussed today. It's been written by Hafiz Pasha. We launched it in an earlier panel. It's available for free poolside next to the free lunch, I believe. So thank you all, our panelists, very much. I think we will meet again and discuss this again in some time. Thank you all for attending. Thank you all for doing the good work you're doing. Keep it up. And I wish you an enjoyable lunch. Thank you.